Hi guys, this is Sandra of the Alexandrite System, and welcome back to a segment we are now officially calling System System. Today we are sitting down with Jade Miller to talk about her work and her peer support system for multiples. So, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
So for people who don't know me, my name is Jade Miller. I wrote the Dear Little Ones series. There's 3 books in the series, and I had a blog for 4 years called Thoughts from J8, and that is mostly where people have heard of me from.
Let's talk a little bit about Dear Little Ones. I got the first one here. Do you want to talk about what led up to writing Dear Little Ones?
Yeah, sure. So I started a blog in 2014 called Thoughts from J8. And at first I started the blog just for a group of friends that wanted to learn a little bit more about what it was like to be a multiple. And it just was easier to write blog posts that they could all read instead of trying to tell each person everything that I was telling each other person. So I started getting involved online with people who also have DID. And, some people like to be called a multiple. Some people do not like to be associated with that term. So it doesn't really matter to me. But anyway, I use them interchangeably. I hope that's not an issue.
It's not an issue for me.
Yeah. So when I started the blog, I started having a lot of conversations with other multiples. And I just randomly saw someone comment in a group that said, hey, I really wish there was a book for my little ones about dissociative identity disorder. And I thought, that's a really interesting idea. I'm going to go look and see if there are any. And I went on Amazon and I couldn't find anything like that. There's a few. I think there's a few that have been written since then, but at the time I couldn't find anything. So I was like, well, I'm going to play around with this idea because it's really interesting to me. And that's the start of it. That was how I came up with the first draft. And the first book, which I also have here, the first book, the draft was really different than the final version because I wanted to get some feedback from the actual multiple community, what they thought about it. And so the first draft was a lot more the tone was kind of like the ID comes from trauma, you might have been abused or whatever. And then I had some people who agreed to review the first draft and said, hey, this isn't my experience and I can't relate to this part of it. Maybe you could change the wording. So I changed the wording in a few spots so that hopefully it'll cover most people's experiences, even if they didn't have a horrible childhood or, if your trauma comes from something else or you don't even have trauma. Obviously, it's difficult to write a book that covers such a wide range of experiences, but I did my best.
I read on your blog. It was one of the final posts, I guess. Mentioned how you changed the subtitle of Dear Little Ones to remove mentions of DID, and I believe you said it was to make it more approachable for people who may not be multiple but may have child parts, I suppose.
It had the subtitle, I think, for maybe the first couple of years. And there were a few reviews on Amazon where the person mentioned, this is a really cool book, but I wish the subtitle wasn't there because I have a lot of clients who experience some sort of fragmentation, but they don't identify as someone having dissociative identity disorder. And just because of some of the leftover stigma that's around that label, they wouldn't necessarily want to be associated with that diagnosis. And I can understand that. I think that's unfortunate because I think there needs to be a lot more awareness about what it is and what it isn't. But I can also understand why it would probably make the book a little bit more accessible for people who experience having an inner child, but don't necessarily feel like they're a system, quote unquote. So I removed the subtitle. I really wanted it to be accessible for people because there are a lot of people who have parts, but they don't necessarily have that label. And I wanted it to be able to speak to them without them being intimidated by going, oh my God, do I have DID? There were some people that were a little bit upset about it and were like, well, our little ones just were disappointed because they finally had a book just for them. And, but I mean, at the end of the day, you can't please everyone. So
yeah,
the same thing with the illustrations. Some people really like them. Some people really don't like them. And I'm just like, I had to make a decision. I can't pick something that everyone's going to love. So
being a creator is hard in regards to that, especially when you're a creator, I guess, speaking for a community in some way or speaking to a community.
Yeah, it's such a diverse community and I don't want anyone to say that they have all the knowledge and that you have to define yourself this way, or these are the only terms you can use. I think everybody gets to say what their terminology is, and they get to say what their experience is, and it's not going to be the same for everybody.
Yeah, I kind of look forward to the day when the general multiple system community comes together a bit more.
Yeah.
Like, I feel we're still so early in those stages. I mean, being multiple has been around for forever theoretically.
Yeah.
But like, I feel it's kind of just starting to pop off.
Yeah. Yeah, even the concept of fragmentation is starting to trend a little bit. Not a ton, but a little bit more than I've seen in a little while, because there are some people that are pretty popular on Facebook and social media that have talked about inner child and things like that recently. So it's becoming more popular. The concept is becoming less strange. So I'm glad about that.
So let's talk about the reason why we're having you on the show primarily, your new peer support program for multiples.
Yeah, so I got to the point in 2018 where I felt like I didn't want to give generic advice behind a computer screen anymore, because you can only say so many things that's kind of generalized, but it's not really specific, so it's not going to help everybody. And I'm really good at big picture stuff, but I can't really give specific advice unless I'm specifically working with one person and or their parts. So I just got to the point where I felt like I don't want to blog anymore. I want to actually make connections with real systems. So I decided not to blog anymore and wanted to start doing peer work. So peer work is not something a lot of people have heard about, especially in the US. It seems like it's more popular in Britain. Yeah, I think it's something that's more common over there, and I'm hoping that it'll gain some traction in the US. But like, people don't realize that if they've ever used a sponsor, like in AA, they've had peer support. So really all it is someone who has lived experience in whatever you're going through, that's made it through it or is doing better than you are in that area, who's kind of just taking your hand and going, hey, this is what worked for me. Here's some stuff you can try. And they also have the experience, so they know what you're going through. Mm-hmm. So I liked the thought of doing that with multiples, and I don't know that there's necessarily a whole lot of people out there who's doing it. There are professionals who have DID, but they can't really like make that known because of the stigma around it still, and because people would question their ability to be a working professional. So it's just not a real common thing. I don't know. I mean, I think that some people look at DID as something that is just this really serious, complex thing that only professionals should handle. And I mean, I guess in some ways there are parts of it that they can be pretty intimidating. There are things that I probably wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable or qualified to work with. Like I would never presume to tell someone like, well, you should try this medication or that medication. Because I'm not a doctor. But as far as the experience goes, I've had 12 years of lived experience. So I've gotten to a point where me and my inside people are cooperative. We can communicate. We have, a pretty peaceful existence. So I don't know who better to lead someone through it than someone who's already been there.
What is it like for someone to come into your program?
Right. So first thing people do when they are interested in working with me is they would fill out the application. And that is just to give me some preliminary information about them and their system. Because for me, it's important to know before I talk to them for the first time. Like, do you know for sure that you have parts? Are you able to communicate with them? Do you just have, evidence around the house or evidence in your life experiences? Do they have names? I mean, just how far they are along in that realization. And then usually after that, I mean, I've never gotten anybody apply that I felt like, no, I probably can't work with this person. So after that, I have a 30-minute consultation with them, and it's completely free. I just want to talk to them and let them know what we would be doing if they decided to work with me. And that gives me a chance to tell them about the program and them ask any questions. So what I do is I have a curriculum that I've written that helps people. And there's really 2 tracks. There's like a beginner track. So if you're very new to the whole concept and you have parts, but that's really all you know, you can't really communicate with them. You don't know how many there are. You don't know what they're doing, why they're there, anything like that. So I have the beginner track for people who are just trying to figure out like what in the world is going on inside my head. And then the advanced track is for people who know that they have parts. They kind of have a relationship established with them, but maybe they're not getting along with them, or maybe they have huge conflicts with some of them, or they don't know how to get them to work together, and they just need help. They need somebody to help them like straighten out the relationships between them. So when we talk on the phone, we kind of figure out like which track you think would be the most appropriate for you. And then I let them know the pricing, and it's a 3-month, it's one time a week is when we would talk for 1 hour for 3 months. And so at the 3-month mark, we would take a break. And if they want to continue a little bit later, they can. But I feel like it's such an intense type of work that we would be doing together that they probably are going to need a breather right about the 12th week. So I feel like it's wise to go like to hit it hard for 12 weeks and then take a break.
What makes it so intense, do you feel?
I feel like just discovering that you have parts can be a little bit of a game changer for some people. I know for me, when I first started realizing that all of these things that I had struggled with since I was a kid was probably because I had parts, it was disorienting. It was like, on the one hand, I was hugely relieved because now there was an explanation for all these really unexplainable things, but then it was also very disorienting. And some of that was just because of all the, like, people who don't have any education about DID or what it means to be a multiple, like just the average person walking down the road, they think it means you're crazy. So I had to like kind of get through that process and go, okay, I don't think I'm crazy. Like, am I just completely in denial of the fact and everyone else knows it, but they're too nice to tell me? Or is it just very different than what I was raised to believe it is? Because like your experience is so familiar to you. So it kind of questions your whole entire reality to go, am I crazy and I just didn't know it? Or is this actually very, very normal? I mean, so normal that I've gone this long without even knowing it was happening. And I was just kind of raised and educated to think it was something totally different.
Yeah, I was talking with one of my other friends who's, also a system, and we were talking about how DID and schizophrenia as well are like the two mental health diagnoses where most people hear those and like just kind of assume that you're a serial killer.
Right. It's so bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah. When obviously like no system I know is a serial killer probably. But but it's like every system I know is generally just like a gentle person, like a normal person.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things where it's like when you have no knowledge and no experience, and because this is something that's, I guess, so shoved to the side, I guess you get all these assumptions just from like media and from, I don't know, just the phrase multiple personality disorder or whatever comes with all sorts of stigma that, to a degree, dissociative identity disorder does not. I know that kind of went all over the place, but...
No, I think it was great. I think you're right. I think the media has a lot to do with it. And my friend Sarah K. Reese has written an excellent article when that movie Split came out about how people who are multiples are really no more likely statistically to be violent than any other person. They're no more likely to have freckles or be redheaded. I mean, there's nothing that makes us more likely to be something like a serial killer than anybody else. And as a matter of fact, we're more likely to be victimized, really, than anything else. So, yeah, I agree with you.
In your summary there, you said the phrase how far along they are on that path. Do you find that a lot of systems sort of take a similar path in their discovery?
Yes and no, because the interesting thing about people who have a system is that there are a lot of things that are very similar between systems, but then there are a lot of things that can be wildly different. So sometimes there are things about the process that can be very similar, but then each system's experience is very different. So I do think that in the beginning, there's usually this sort of awakening period to the fact that they have parts. And this could be just like them finding stuff out from the night before that they don't remember getting out. Or like someone maybe out in public who calls them a different name and they're like, what? That's not my name. Just, it's almost become cliche at this point. Some of these experiences, it's kind of become like, I don't know what the word is, but even though they are sort of the stereotypical things that people list as symptoms, I mean, I've had those experiences and so have some other people that I know. So I think there is kind of an awakening period to realizing that something different is happening with your mind than maybe a neurotypical person's. So I have seen systems follow a similar path in that way, but not necessarily like each individual person's discovery process, and each individual part in a system is going to have a slightly different experience.
Mm-hmm. So we touched on this a little bit back in the beginning of this conversation, but what do you feel that multiples can bring to the table when helping other multiples besides just like the baseline experience of being multiple?
Well, I mean, that's a big one. Just not having to explain to the other person, because like some of my clients, I have one that has called me recently and just said, you know, I have friends that I could talk to about this stuff, but it would require so much explanation because of the fact that I have other inside people that I don't even feel like trying to tell them about it, because just the backstory of what it's like to be a multiple would make the thing so long that I just rather talk to you about it because I don't have to explain that part of it. I think honestly, like, besides having the experience of having these different people inside the same body, honestly, it's really just like conflict resolution. Because when a lot of times the problems that people are having as a multiple is that their system is kind of a mess and people hate each other or people are fighting or arguing, like, I know it sounds really simple, but making things simple is kind of my wheelhouse. So it just comes down to like conflict resolution and good people skills. And it just happens to be like with two different people inside of yourself. And I mean, it is more complicated than that, but I mean, I don't know that there's necessarily something more valuable than the lived experience of having different people in your mind that a multiple brings in working with other multiples. Now, there is a lot of self-education involved a lot. Like, I do want to go back to therapy myself one day. I mean, I'm functional. It's not that I'm like in crisis or anything. I'm very functional, have, you know, good support. I'm in a good place, but I know there's more work to do. I think there always is, but I can tell almost within the first 20 minutes when I walk into a therapist's office and start talking to them, whether I know more about what I'm dealing with than they do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the sad part, because we expect that therapists are going to know everything and be able to help us immediately. But I mean, the last 2 or 3 that I've tried, I've ended up just canceling because it's like, I don't feel like educating you about this. And we don't agree on some really basic things about the therapeutic process. So I don't want to waste either of our time. So a lot of multiples, if they're going to help another multiple, they have the self-education from like what works and what doesn't that they've already tried or been through with therapists.
What do you find yourself disagreeing on with these big factors that you're disagreeing on with these therapists?
Well, one of the therapists that I tried about a year ago, she was very, very much, I forget what she called herself. I think she used the word psychopharmaceutical therapist. Oh. But basically she believed in like a medication for every problem that you could have. And so I don't necessarily think that alters or inside people, whatever you want to call them, I don't think that they necessarily need to be drugged away. I mean, I think there's times when if you have depression or you have anxiety or you're having some kind of crippling symptom where you might need the support of medication. And I don't have any issue with medication itself. But when a therapist looks at that as the answer to all of your problems, I have a problem with that.
Yeah, that's really understandable.
Yeah. So, I mean, she asked me within the first session, she was like, so you said you were hearing voices. Tell me about them. And I was like, no. And she kind of was taken aback. I can tell no one had ever said no to her probably in that setting. And she was like, well, why not? And I said, because I don't trust you. And she kind of laughed, but I could tell she was not expecting me to have boundaries.
Yeah.
I never ended up telling her about them because I determined really early on that we were not a good fit. And my inside people were going, please don't tell her about us. And I was like, don't worry, I'm not.
Yeah. Like I learned pretty quickly when trying to find a therapist that, you know, could handle working with us, that don't list hearing voices as the first thing that like gives you a clue that you may or may not have DID.
Right.
I feel so many professionals will jump like right to schizophrenia before they jump to DID, even though DID is, like, if you go strictly by the percentages in the DSM, it's twice as common as schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this person, I mean, I think that she's probably really good at her job with the people that are actually appropriate for her to be their therapist, but we just were not a good match. I mean, she flat out told me in like the first or second session, and I think I only had 3. She was like, "Oh, you don't have DID," and I was like, the irony of you telling that to a part. You're not even talking to the front person right now. The irony of you saying that to like one of the main front runners who's not actually the front runner. And then she said, "I'm going to give you this diagnostic test and we'll just see what it says." And I was like, "Okay, but I'm going to be taking the test as me, not as the entire system. So I don't know what it's going to tell you." But I just said, "Well, what if it doesn't say I have DID, but I know that I do?" And she said, "Well, why don't we just cross that bridge when we come to it?" And I mean, of course, people are going to be misdiagnosed and miscategorized because I was taking it as Jade, not as my entire system. So it didn't necessarily reflect DID, but that's because it wouldn't. I was taking it as an individual. But I think that's another area where the diagnostic stuff that they have out there is not always adequate or appropriate.
Was it the multidimensional index of dissociation?
I don't think so. It was I wish I wrote down what it was. It actually didn't ask me anything about dissociation at all, which I also thought was funny. But I don't remember. It was this like 3-page multiple choice. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe I could find it online if I looked for it. I don't know what it was. But it wasn't. It had nothing to do with dissociation specifically. So. Yeah,
I feel a lot of those diagnostic rubrics or whatever, those guides have so many limitations. The mid that I just mentioned, I have so many issues with the mid. One of them is that it basically will not flag you for DID unless you answer a question that says, "Do you think you have multiple personalities?"
Wow. How ridiculous.
It's like you basically already have to kind of know that you have DID before you get flagged for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we have to do their job for them before they'll tell us that we're right.
Yeah, I find it's so difficult to find a good therapist for being multiple. Mm-hmm. I definitely know that that's a struggle for many systems. That's basically why your program exists.
Yeah, I would much rather there be really good therapists out there that know their stuff and that know how to help systems, because I mean, I don't claim that I am going to fill in the shoes for a therapist in the same way that they would, because I wouldn't. I'm not trained in the Freudian, Jungian, all the theories and all the, I don't have all that knowledge. So my knowledge is personal experience and some things that they can try that helped me. But I mean, I would love it if there were just therapists that were trauma informed in the true sense of the word, because a lot of them will say they are, but they don't actually really know what that means. And then, people in helping professions always hope that they can work themselves out of a job. I don't know that that's going to happen anytime soon, but I mean, I'd love it if they were more common and more accessible.
If you had the opportunity to like sit down with, I guess, every trauma specialist in the world at once, what is like one thing that you would want them to know or understand about this experience?
That's a great question. I think I would probably want them to know that the most important thing they can do with a person who has parts is to let the person be their own expert and to learn from them as to what their system is, to what it needs. Like a lot of times, even people who are educated about DID, it's ironic because they want to take this authority that they really don't need to have in the relationship and be the one to define things for that person. And honestly, like just about any trauma survivor you'd ever meet has already felt disempowered. That's why they're traumatized. They don't need someone else who's supposed to be helping them, making them feel more like they don't have the appropriate amount of power in their life. They need somebody to go, no, you know what your system needs, even if they're not aware of it, because nobody is at the beginning. They need somebody to come in and go, your system is trustworthy. Even though it might be a mess right now, your system has everything in it that it needs to heal. I'm just here to help guide you, but you don't need me to tell you what's what. You just need to discover what's already there.
I will get into the last two questions I like to ask all systems. The first one is, if you could vanish one piece of system-related media from the face of the earth, what would it be?
As far as like something out there already that's about DID?
Yes.
I'm sure that I wouldn't be the only one that's ever said Sybil, right?
It's a rarer answer than the usual split that I get, but
yeah.
Why Sybil in particular?
Because as far as I understand it, which I could definitely be wrong, it was one of the oldest first, I guess, pieces of media that got so much attention. Mm-hmm. Because there's always been media out there as far as I know. There's been, books and movies and things, but Sybil got nationwide attention, and Sybil is what a lot of people have based their information and even their impressions of what it means to be MPD or DID on. And Sybil itself, I don't necessarily have a problem with her story, but the way she was portrayed and the way that the disorder was portrayed, I think it's done a lot of harm, to be honest. The switching is not so obvious and flamboyant, and all the inside people are not so extremely different and recognizable. I mean, sometimes they are. There are systems where if you took, I don't know, even if you only went by age, if you took the youngest person in the system and compared them to the oldest person in the system, there's going to be some things you could probably recognize that are different if you're looking for it. But most systems are designed to hide themselves. So they're not going to be that, I can't think of the word, they're not going to be that outrageous in showing themselves to the public. So I don't know. I'm not a fan of the way Sybil affected people's impression of what DID is. Mm-hmm. I think it's done a lot of harm, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think Split probably wouldn't exist in the form that it is now without Sybil, because Sybil informed a lot of what came after it. So I guess I'm trying to kill the source.
And my final question is, do you have anything to say to other systems out there?
I want to tell people that they can recover, as far as not recover from DID, but they can have a peaceful life. I don't think DID is something that you have to recover from. And I know that that's another thing I wish I could tell therapists is integration isn't the answer. I mean, if people have parts that want to stop doing the job that they originally started doing, cool. But there's no need for anybody to die or go away. There's a lot of fear out there about what healing looks like. And that's another area where each system needs to be able to define its own idea of what healing is. But I just want systems to know that you can have a healthy and happy life. And you don't have to go away. Your people don't have to disappear or die or go to sleep, or people can have a peaceful life. They can have a fulfilling life and still be a multiple. I mean, every part matters and every part counts. So that's what I would want people to know.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you online?
So I have a couple of different places. Thoughts from J8 is my blog, thoughtsfromj8.com. And most people know that. If you look it up, they can find me. And my new site is peersupportformultiples.com. And that is the peer support site if anybody is interested in working with me. So if they want to work with me, they can fill out an application, and then we'll talk for 30 minutes and just figure out if it's a good match and if they want to move forward. And that's mainly where I'm at right now.
Fantastic. I'm going to link that all in the description. So thank you so much for joining me again. It was lovely having you on.
Thank you for having me. It's actually my first time I've done this, so I really appreciate that a lot.
Thank you again to Jade Miller for joining us. Until next time, guys. Take care. Bye.